At my valedictorian graduation, my parents said they were too tired to attend. Then I saw my sister's Instagram story of their spa day that same weekend. I rewrote my speech and revealed the truth about 22 years of systematic favoritism that destroyed their perfect family image forever. Standing at that podium, looking out at hundreds of faces while knowing my own parents had chosen pedicures over my biggest achievement, I made a decision that would change everything. But before I explain how my carefully planned response led to my sister collapsing in tears in a parking lot and my parents' social circle turning against them, you need to understand the strategic advantages they never knew I possessed. I'm Claire Mitchell, and at 22, I'd spent my entire life documenting every slight, every dismissal, every time my achievements were ignored, while my younger sister Lily received praise for mediocrity. What my parents never realized was that their academically gifted daughter had been building a case against them with the methodical precision of a prosecutor preparing for trial. While they saw me as the quiet, studious one who would always be fine on her own, I had actually been developing connections and skills that would prove invaluable. My journalism professor, Dr. Rebecca Carson, wasn't just a mentor. She was the former chief editor of the Boston Herald with contacts throughout New England's media landscape. My academic advisor had already secured me a position at the Atlantic's digital division, starting after graduation. And Mrs. Harper, my high school English teacher who had driven 4 hours to attend my graduation when my own parents couldn't manage two, had become more than a mentor. She was documenting everything. The morning I discovered their betrayal through Lily's Instagram posts, I wasn't just heartbroken. I was strategically furious. While my roommate Riley found me crying, I was already calculating exactly how to leverage this moment for maximum impact. You see, I'd learned something crucial during my 4 years studying communications and psychology. Public humiliation is most effective when it's delivered calmly, with receipts, and by someone the audience respects. My parents, Michael and Catherine Mitchell, had built their entire social identity around being successful professionals who raised accomplished daughters. Dad's accounting firm, Mitchell and Associates, handled finances for half the prominent families in our suburb. Mom's real estate agency specialized in luxury homes, trading on her reputation as a refined woman who knew the right people. Their carefully curated image was their most valuable asset, and it was about to become their greatest vulnerability. The first call came from my grandmother in Florida 40 minutes after my speech aired on the university's live stream. "Claire, honey," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "your cousin Melissa was watching and immediately called your mother. I think you've caused quite a stir in the family." That was exactly what I'd intended. The beauty of public truth-telling is that it forces people to choose sides, and I knew which side most reasonable people would choose when presented with evidence of parents skipping their daughter's valedictorian graduation for spa treatments. Within 2 hours, my phone was buzzing with messages from relatives, family friends, and even some of my parents' business associates who had seen the video. Mrs. Harper had been recording on her phone and posted clips to her social media, which was then shared by other teachers, parents from my high school, and eventually picked up by local news outlets as an example of generational communication breakdowns. But the real strategic masterstroke wasn't just the speech. It was what I had prepared for the aftermath. During my junior year, I'd started what I called my documentation project for a psychology course on family dynamics. I had meticulously recorded instances of differential treatment, screenshots of text conversations, copies of report cards and awards certificates, photos of gift disparities, and even a detailed calendar showing attendance patterns at school events. What began as an academic exercise had evolved into comprehensive evidence of systematic favoritism. I had recorded phone calls where my parents discussed missing my events while rearranging schedules for Lily's activities. I had email chains about family vacation planning that excluded my academic commitments while accommodating her social calendar. I had financial records showing the vast differences in what they spent on each of us. Lily's car versus my bus pass, her complete college funding versus my partial scholarship supplementation. Most damaging of all, I had recordings from the previous Christmas when they thought I was upstairs, where my mother explicitly told relatives that Claire will always be fine because she's naturally disciplined, but Lily needs more support because she's more sensitive. The implications were clear. They had consciously decided I deserve less because I required less, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy of neglect. When my parents drove 4 hours to confront me that evening, they had no idea they were walking into a carefully prepared arena where I held every advantage. "Your speech was completely inappropriate," my mother said the moment she entered my dorm room, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "You embarrassed our family in front of hundreds of people. We've had calls from relatives, neighbors. Even your father's business clients saw the video online." I looked at her with the calm composure I'd been practicing for months. "I'm sorry you feel embarrassed by the truth, though I notice you're not denying anything I said." My father stepped forward, adopting the intimidating posture that had silenced me throughout childhood. "What do you think you've accomplished with this little performance, besides making your mother cry and creating unnecessary family drama?" "It wasn't a performance, Dad. It was 22 years of being treated as less important than Lily, of having my achievements ignored while her smallest efforts were celebrated, of being excluded from family activities and dismissed as naturally independent while she received constant attention and support." That's when I pulled out my comprehensive documentation folder. "Since you brought up support," I said, spreading documents across my desk, "let's discuss this systematically. On Lily's 16th birthday, you bought her a $28,000 Honda Civic. For mine, I received a $50 bookstore gift card. When Lily needed a laptop for school, she got the latest MacBook Pro at $2,400. I got a refurbished computer that was 3 years old for $400. My mother's face flushed. "Are you seriously itemizing gift values? How materialistic. It's not about money. It's about the message these disparities send. But since you mentioned values, let's look at non-material support." I pulled out my hand-drawn calendar. I documented every school event for both of us during junior and senior year of high school. Lily had 47 events. You attended 45. I had 39 events. You attended 8, and only when they didn't conflict with anything of Lily's. My father's face had gone from red to white. "This is insane. You kept records like you were building a legal case against your own family?" "I kept records because you both gaslight me every time I bring up the disparity in how you treat us, just like you're doing right now." That's when I played my trump card, the Christmas recording. "Would you like to hear your own words from last Christmas Eve?" I asked, pulling out my phone. "When you thought I was upstairs and you were explaining to Aunt Martha why you invest more energy in Lily than me?" The color drained from both their faces as my mother's voice filled the room. "Claire has always been so self-sufficient, you know. She doesn't need the same level of support. But Lily is more delicate. She needs us to guide her through everything. It's actually easier this way because Claire will succeed no matter what we do." The silence that followed was deafening. "You see," I continued, my voice perfectly steady, "you made a strategic error. You assumed that because I didn't demand attention, I didn't deserve it. You mistook independence born from necessity for indifference to family connection. And worst of all, you documented your favoritism so clearly that even you can't deny it anymore." My mother tried to regain control. "We never meant to make you feel less loved. You were always so independent, so capable." "No," I replied. "You made me independent by withholding support. There's a difference." The conversation continued for another hour with my parents alternating between defensive justifications and what seemed like genuine shock at seeing their behavior laid out so systematically. But the real surprise came when Lily arrived. She'd driven separately and had been waiting in the lobby, finally working up the courage to face the confrontation she knew was coming. When she entered the room, I expected her to side with our parents as she always had. Instead, she walked over and stood beside me. "Actually, Mom," she said, her voice firmer than I'd ever heard when addressing our parents, "I think we need to finish this conversation, all of us." My parents exchanged worried glances. This wasn't part of their plan. "There's nothing to discuss," my father said firmly. "Claire is being dramatic and trying to make herself the center of attention as usual." "No, Dad," Lily said. "Claire's telling the truth. You've always favored me, and we all know it." The complete silence that followed was broken only by my mother's uncomfortable laugh. "Lily, honey, that's not true. We love you both equally." "Then why can't you name a single time you chose Claire over me?" Lily asked. "Why can't you explain why you lied about being too tired for her graduation when you were actually planning a weekend of activities with me?" What happened next was the most satisfying moment of strategic vindication I'd ever experienced. My parents, faced with evidence they couldn't refute and their golden child confirming the truth, began to crumble. My father attempted damage control. "We're not having this conversation in a dormitory with witnesses. This is family business." "Fine," I said, surprising everyone. "Riley, would you mind giving us the room? I think my family needs to have an honest conversation for once." After Riley left, I laid out my final terms. "Let me be very clear about something. I don't need your approval anymore. I don't need your validation or attention, though it would have been nice to have those things growing up. What I do need is honesty. No more gaslighting, no more excuses, no more pretending this favoritism doesn't exist." My mother sat down heavily on my bed. "We never meant to make you feel less loved. You were always so self-sufficient. Lily needed us more." "I didn't need them more," Lily interjected. "You needed me to need you. There's a difference." The conversation that followed was unlike anything our family had ever experienced. For the first time in 22 years, we spoke truthfully about the dynamics that had shaped our relationships. My father, when pressed directly, couldn't deny that my academic achievements reminded him of his own unfulfilled potential. My mother eventually admitted that living vicariously through Lily's social success had been easier than acknowledging her own faded dreams, but the real consequences were just beginning to unfold. By the next morning, my graduation speech had been viewed over 50,000 times across various platforms. Mrs. Harper's Facebook post had been shared by hundreds of teachers, creating conversations about favoritism in families across New England. Local news outlets picked up the story, framing it as "Valedictorian's truth-telling moment sparks family crisis." The professional impact on my parents was swift and severe. My father's accounting firm began losing clients who felt uncomfortable with someone who would publicly neglect his daughter's achievements. My mother's real estate career took an immediate hit when her carefully cultivated image as a devoted mother was shattered by viral video evidence to the contrary. Within a month, they'd lost approximately $200,000 in business contracts. Their social standing in the community, built over decades, crumbled as neighbors and friends began questioning what kind of parents would miss their daughter's valedictorian graduation for spa appointments. The most poetic justice came 6 weeks later, when they were forced to cancel their planned European vacation. The money they'd budgeted for that trip was needed to replace the business they'd lost from their damaged reputation. Meanwhile, my career flourished in ways I'd never anticipated. The Atlantic offered me additional opportunities after seeing how my story resonated with readers nationwide. I began writing a column about family dynamics and generational communication that became one of their most read features. The essay I eventually published, titled "The Invisible Daughter: How Academic Success Can Hide Family Neglect," was featured in major publications and led to speaking engagements at universities across the country. I was earning more in my first year post-graduation than my parents had initially projected I'd make in 5 years. Lily and I developed the genuine relationship we'd never been allowed to have when we were competing for parental attention. She moved to New York 6 months after me, finally pursuing her own dreams rather than fulfilling our parents' vicarious ambitions. The most satisfying outcome wasn't the financial success or professional recognition. It was the fundamental shift in family dynamics. My parents were forced to confront their behavior, not just privately, but publicly, with lasting social and financial consequences. They attempted reconciliation, but on my terms now. I accepted their apologies while making it clear that rebuilding trust would require consistent changed behavior, not just words. The power dynamic had shifted permanently. I was no longer the invisible daughter desperate for recognition, but a successful adult who could choose her level of engagement with them. A year after graduation, when I received a prestigious journalism award and invited them to the ceremony, they drove 8 hours through a snowstorm to attend. They sat in the front row, applauding enthusiastically, and afterward told everyone who would listen about their daughter's achievements. It had taken public humiliation and significant financial losses, but they'd finally learned the cost of taking their children for granted. The daughter they'd assumed would always be fine on her own had not only thrived despite their neglect, but had used their own dismissive behavior to build a platform that reached thousands of people with similar experiences. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't getting angry. It's getting strategic, getting successful, and getting the last word in front of an audience that finally sees the truth.